So I wanted to compare the Shun Sora and the global knives and sort of give you a little bit of insight into the differences and the similarities between them, since they are in the same price range and you might find yourself trying to choose between the two. They're both Japanese knives, they're both made in Japan, and they're both handmade, and that's sort of one of the biggest reasons that many people find themselves trying to choose between these two. Off the bat, one thing to note is they're both ground to relatively similar angles, 15 degrees and 16 degrees, which means they're very thin, very, very sharp blades. And from that point on, let's discuss some of the differences. Essentially, this is sort of a weird knife because it doesn't actually have a tang. It has a hollow sand-filled handle that's welded on to the actual blade, whereas this does have a full tang. Essentially, it ends right here, but for practical purposes, it works the exact same way as a full tang, even though it's technically considered a rabbit tang. Another note is that global knives use actually pretty soft steel. They use Cremova 18, which is only about 56 to 58 hardness, whereas Shun's use the gold standard VG10, which is about 60 to 61 hardness. There are pros and cons. The pros are that this knife is going to hold its edge very, very well, and it's very resilient and it's very hard, so as you use it, nothing's really bending that edge and making it dull. The cons are, or the pros for the globals rather, are that since this is softer, if you abuse the knife, if you throw it into the sink, if you do things like that, there is much less chance of getting little chips or things like that in the blade, though it will bend it pretty hard. I think as long as you're using the knife properly and effectively, both can work, but I've always been a bigger fan of the harder steels just because that's less maintenance, it's less honing, and it's less just BS to deal with on a daily basis. The next thing to note is that even though this is VG10, they then wrap it in stainless steel and weld it on, which does a couple of things. Number one, it gives it this gorgeous design on the blade, but number two, it makes it very resilient to stains and rust and pitting and things like that. The global, on the other hand, is just a solid piece of stainless steel, which makes it much more likely to rust and to have all of that stuff going on, since there is a healthy amount of carbon in it for the actual cutting edge. Next thing to note is that the Shun Sora has a 10-year warranty, the global has a lifetime warranty, but really, as we know, knife warranties aren't really all they're cracked up to be because they only cover manufacturing defects, which would show up in the first few weeks or first few months of using the knife anyway. Anything past that, they're just going to say, it's your fault for throwing it into the garbage disposal, we're not going to fix it. So that's sort of a moot point, I think. The more important point is the Shun comes with lifetime free sharpening, and the global does not. And that's important with globals for a couple of reasons. Number one, as you guys know, if you take your knife to a reputable sharpener, it's going to cost you about $5 per inch on a straight knife like both of these without serrations to sharpen it. That means that both of these knives would cost roughly $40 alone just to sharpen, and that's not considering horror stories and wondering if they do a good job, etc., etc. The second thing to note is not many people can sharpen global knives because, as you see, it has this very weird grinding angle to it. It actually starts being sharpened from about a centimeter up, and it has a concave angle, or a convex angle, all the way down to the tip of the blade. And since when you're sharpening with a whetstone, you're placing it flat and just going back and forth, and not sort of rolling it and doing weird things like that, not many knife sharpeners can handle this. So with both of those said, with the Shun, you just ship it to Shun, and you can rest easy knowing that the manufacturer of the knife is putting the exact same edge back on the knife as when you first bought it and first fell in love with it. So with all of that said, plus the fact that this comes with lifetime sharpening, and the fact that it's actually a cheaper knife than the global, I would highly, highly suggest, if you're looking for an entry-level set of knives, to purchase the Shun Sora. If you really like this design, and if you know how to sharpen knives yourself, or if you're willing to learn how to sharpen knives yourself, or if you don't mind paying extra to have someone sharpen this sort of knife for you, then the global is obviously a great choice. But I prefer a harder steel that doesn't need to be sharpened and honed that often. And I really like the design, frankly, of the Shun Sora as well. I think it looks very beautiful. Either way, I'll put a link down to both below. If you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, as always, let me know. But otherwise, I will talk to you very soon.